Good morning, everyone, and welcome to some stops along the way. I hope you're having a great Christmas season so far, getting ready for that amazing holiday coming up. Whether or not you've got family coming in or whether you're celebrating it on your own, I hope it's a joyous season for you. We are going to pick up where we left off at the last episode, looking at the country of Bangladesh here in just a few moments. But before we do, want to remind you that this podcast is supported by a book of the same name, Some Stops Along the Way, my memoir of years on the road in the international development business. It's available on Amazon. Hope you'll grab a copy of it. If you're interested in learning more about countries and also looking at them through the lens of some of the very interesting people that I've met and experiences that I've had, you'll enjoy this book. You might also notice my shirt. I just got back from Alaska not long ago. Glacier Bay National Park is an amazing place. If you haven't been there, I'd suggest you go, but you might want to wait until spring or summer and not do it in the winter. Although I would love to spend a winter in Alaska, frankly. My wife, not so much. She was not very pleased with the weather when we were there, but it is a fascinating place. And who knows, I might do a podcast episode on Alaska at some point in time. But today we're back on Bangladesh, which is a country that I worked in a couple of different occasions. Most recently in early 2025, so earlier this year. And it is a profoundly interesting country for a lot of reasons. First and foremost, because, as I said in the last episode, it is one of the most, if not the most densely populated country in the world. It's got about 170 million people in roughly a 57,320 square mile area. That is people on top of people. And this type of population has created some real challenges in the country. Environmental challenges, infrastructure challenges, health challenges. Being responsible for that many people in that small an area is certainly a daunting challenge for any government. Even the most functional governments would see that as a daunting challenge. But where you have a government in Bangladesh that has not been as functional since their independence as one would like, it's certainly a huge uphill struggle to address the varied and growing needs of that particular country, which is why people like myself have dedicated their time and efforts in the past to working in the country and trying to enhance both its economic growth, its governance, as well as its healthcare, its infrastructure, etc. Bangladesh cannot be understood from afar. And as a matter of fact, as a foreigner, we'll never understand the intricacies of a country like Bangladesh, or really any country that is not our home. But our understanding can be at least aided by looking at the historical context that has brought Bangladesh to where it is today. So we want to talk a little bit about that early in this podcast, and then we'll move on to more of the political and economic context. But first, some history. The first great indigenous empire in what is now Bangladesh was the Maurya Empire, which lasted from about 320 to 185 BC. This was followed by a series of other empires such as the Gupta, Harsha empires, and then the Buddhist Pala Empire from 750 to 1150 AD. Now, this empire was important because it introduced Buddhism to the country for the first time. In 1150, the country was invaded by and governed by the Muslim Ghurid dynasty, which lasted from about 1150 to 1205. It's a relatively short period of time for a dynasty, but it's important in the fact that introduced a Muslim influence into the country. During the medieval period, what is now Bangladesh was part of the Delhi Sultanate. So basically, what is now India was linked at that time to Bangladesh. And the Delhi Sultanate lasted from about 1206 through about 1526 AD. This introduced Hinduism into the Bangladesh culture. And then in 1526, the Mughals arrived, which reintroduced a brand of Islam from 1526 to 1717. After 1717, what is now Bangladesh became a semi-independent state for about 40 years, 1717 to roughly 1757, when British rule began. Bangladesh was part of the British Empire from 1757 to 1947. And as in most of the countries that were part of the British Empire, it was a mixed bag. There was some good, there was some bad. The good part of that equation was that the British brought a system and they brought some order. They brought their brand of government and architecture and infrastructure to the country. So there was a lot of modernization that took place during British colonial rule. On the other side, however, the British had very little concept of the overall cultural or historical paradigms that drove the mindset of the people in what would later become Bangladesh. And so, either by accident or on purpose, they created a societal system where there were a few of the locals that they depended on, that had some influence, that they knew would be loyal to the British Empire, and they became the elite in the country, while everyone else tended to languish in various levels of poverty. This was pretty traditional in the British Empire around the world, and not just the British. Most of the colonial countries operated in this same way, give or take some outlying examples. But in 1947, Bangladesh became part of Pakistan. And this was important from the fact that this created a linkage to Pakistan that even today has ramifications for the country. Bangladesh was part of Pakistan from 1947 until its independence on 16 December 1971. Now, this independence came at quite a cost. It came through a very debilitating war where there were many atrocities on both sides. It left a legacy of conflict between these two nations that exist in varying forms even until this day. But in 1971, Bangladesh became an independent country. Again, good news and bad news. The good news is that they were now free to govern themselves and to build the kind of society they wanted instead of what the Mughals wanted, or what the Indians wanted, or what the British wanted, or what the Pakistanis wanted. So, good news. The bad news is that they inherited, if you will, a country that had massive poverty, over 90% of the people in poverty, a nascent governmental structure, and a ruling elite that had been so tied either to the British or Pakistanis that they had little concept of how to govern the country, and were at least perceived to be both politically motivated and corrupt. So this this independence launched a political movement in Bangladesh that has been part and parcel of its trajectory since then. I'm going to talk now about the presidents and the prime ministers of Bangladesh that have been so part of its political mosaic. But the list I'm getting ready to give you of these individuals, the aggregation of that list, if you will, is like the most twisted grade B dramatic movie that you've ever seen. It has intrigue. It has conflict. It has debauchery. It has corruption. It has protagonists. It has antagonists. It has everything that you would expect a dramatic movie to have. And in some ways, it rolled out like a movie that, quite frankly, would be too depressing to watch. And here's what I mean by that. First president of Bangladesh was Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. He served from 25 January 1975 to 15 August of 1975. Now remember, Bangladesh had become independent in 1971, late 1971. But for the first few years, they had a prime minister. They didn't have a president. So the presidency came into being, if you will, in 1975 with Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. And he was assassinated in August of 1975. He was replaced by Conacher Mostaq Ahmad, who was president from 15 August 1975 through 6 November 1975, and he was deposed by a coup d'etat of military officers. He was replaced by Abu Sadat Mohammad Saim, who served as president from 6 November 1975 to 21 April 1977, so a little bit longer, but he resigned for health reasons and was replaced by Ziaur Rahman, who was president from the 21st of April 1977 through the 30th of May 1981 when he was assassinated. So that's almost 10 years, 4 different presidents, 2 of which had been assassinated, 1 deposed in a coup, and 1 resigned for health reasons. Very little stability, very little chance for the government to gain traction to address the acute social, educational, infrastructure issues that faced the country. Following the assassination of Zia Rahman, the next president was Abdus Sattar. He served from 30 May 1981 to 24 March 1982, and he was deposed in a coup as well, and was replaced by Ahsanuddin Chowdhury, who served from 27 March 1982 through 10 December 1983 when he was dismissed. He was basically a caretaker. He was an acting president, if you will, and was replaced by Hussein Mohammed Ershad, who served as president from 10 December 1983 to 6 December 1990. So a little bit longer period, a period of more relative stability, but he was forced to resign and he was jailed for corruption. After Ershad came Shahabuddin Ahmed, who served as president from 6 December 1990 to the 10th of October 1991. He was followed by Abdur Rahman Biswas, who served from 10 October 1991 to 6 October 1996. After which, Shahabuddin Ahmed came back into power and served from 9 October 1996 through 14 November 2001. This was a period of, in Bangladesh terms, relative stability, although there was continual charges of corruption, there was continual political intrigue, and inside, the political machinations were still making it very difficult to address the growing needs in the country. Although the 1990s was a period of relative reforms and increased prosperity within the country. And this led, and this continued throughout the early part of the 2000s. So after Shahabuddin Ahmed's second term, he was replaced by Badwadoza Chowdhury, who served as president from 14 November 2001 to 21 June 2002, and he resigned. His successor was Mohammed Jamardeen Sirkar, who was president from 21 June 2002 through 6 September 2002, again, a caretaker government. He was replaced by Iyajuddin Ahmed, who served almost a 6-year term from 6 September 2002 through 12 February 2009. Again, this was a period of relative increased prosperity within Bangladesh. Ahmed's replacement, the next president, was Zilur Rahman, who served from 12 February 2009 through 20 March 2013, and he died in office. His replacement was Mohammed Abdul Hamid, who served as president from 14 March 2013 through 24 April 2023. The longest serving president to date of Bangladesh, although he went through a lot of political intrigue himself and was actually deported after leaving office, and now is I'm told, is quite ill. And the current president of Bangladesh is Mohammed Shahabuddin. He became president on 24 April 2023 and continues to serve to this day. Continues to serve to this day. So you can tell by just the succession of presidents that this is a very troubled governmental structure. Politics is a blood sport in Bangladesh. They believe in political reprisal. Corruption continues to be endemic in the system. And because of the way their system's structured, it's very hard to gain that stability that is required for long-term economic growth, just because the governments change so often. Now let's look at the prime ministers. It's the same song, second verse. The first prime minister of Bangladesh after independence was Tajuddin Ahmad from 17 April 1971 through 12 January 1972. He died in the Dhaka Central Jail after being pushed from power. The second prime minister was Sheikh Mujibur Rahman from 12 January 1972 through 25 January 1975, and he was assassinated. His successor was Muhammad Mansour Ali, who served as prime minister from 25 January 1975 to 15 August 1975, just a few months, and he was assassinated as well. This led to another caretaker government where Mashur Rahman was acting prime minister from 29 June 1978 to 12 March 1979. And he was replaced by Shah Azizur Ahmad, who served as prime minister from 15 April 1979 through 24 March 1982 and was overthrown in a coup. His successor, Atur Rahman Khan, served from 30 March 1984 to 9 July 1986, and he resigned. The next prime minister, Mizanur Rahman Chowdhury, served from 9 July 1986 through 27 March 1988. He was jailed twice and ended up dying in 2006 after he had been released several years before from custody. The next prime minister was Maudud Ahmed, who served from 27 March 1988 through 12 August 1989. He resigned as well. He was ultimately jailed and evicted from his home. The next prime minister was Qazi Zagar Ahmed, who served from 12 August 1989 through 6 December 1990. He was overthrown and was jailed and died in exile. His successor was the first female prime minister of Bangladesh, Begum Khaleda Zia, who actually served two different times as prime minister, more than 2 terms, 2 different times as prime minister, from 20 March 1991 to 30 March 1996, and then again from 10 October 2001 to 29 October 2006. So together, she had some 10 to 11 years as prime minister on 2 separate occasions. But even so, she was jailed twice and evicted from her home. The next prime minister, and probably one of the most famous or infamous, depending on which side of the aisle you sit on, served from January 6, 2009 through 5 August 2024. Her name is Sheikh Hasina. In August of 2024, Sheikh Hasina was overthrown by a popular revolution led by youth in the country. She exiled to India, and now she faces 142 cases of crimes against humanity for purportedly turning the army on the protesters, using live ammunition and indiscriminately killing the protesters who were trying to overthrow her, and who ultimately did overthrow her. And that led to another caretaker government, the one that is in place now, which is led by economist Muhammad Yunus, who came to power on 8th of August 2024, and now has to try to put Humpty Dumpty back together again from all these broken pieces of Sheikh Hasina's rule in Bangladesh. So again, you look at this list of prime ministers and the revolving door, if you will, that both the president, the office of president, and the office of prime minister had, and the way things ended up for most of these politicians. And you would think, why in the world would you want to be a politician in Bangladesh? I've asked myself that question. I've asked my friends in Bangladesh that question. And of course, it's about power. And this power is consolidated in the hands of relatively few families who cycle their way through government, but they can turn on each other virtually at any time. And so these same patterns of the past continue to repeat themselves. So you might look at all of that and think, okay, number one, hopefully you feel good about your own government now, wherever in the world that you live. But secondly, I think all this is a cautionary tale. You've heard me say on this podcast many times that it's about leadership. It's always about leadership. Great leadership can overcome even the most daunting challenges. If you have poor leadership, then it can cast a country adrift for decades. But even if you have good leadership in a bad system, the end result will not be, or will not put a country on the path of good governance and economic growth. What we're all looking for, of course, is great leadership within a great system. Regrettably, Bangladesh has had neither. Now, that's not to say that there aren't committed, well-meaning, and innovative politicians in Bangladesh, and also heads of NGOs and businesses in the country that are very focused on making the country successful. Certainly, those people exist, and they're working hard to change the country's trajectory. The problem, of course, is that absolute power corrupts absolutely. And this group of power brokers that have cycled in and out of these top levels of government. And Sheikh Hasina is an example of this. Continued to hold on to their positions at the expense of the country. And without the proper systems in place, it was very easy for corruption to continue to fester and for a lot of negative influences and conflicts to arise both within and outside of the country. But even so, Bangladesh cobbled together economic growth, at least on paper. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. You need to understand that shortly after its independence in 1971, approximately 90% of the population of Bangladesh lived below the poverty line. However, since economic reforms and trade liberalization in the early 1990s, along with accelerated growth in the early 2000s, even with all of the chicanery that was going on during government at that time, Bangladesh actually experienced fairly dramatic progress in reducing poverty, at least on paper. According to the World Bank, more than 33 million Bangladeshi people have been lifted out of poverty since 2000. But listen to the way they measure it. The World Bank measures the number of people being lifted out of poverty as a percentage of people living on the equivalent of $1.90 a day or less. Let me repeat that. The World Bank considers the percentage of people living on the equivalent of $1.90 or less a day as being in poverty. So if you look at the other side of that coin, if you're making above $1.90 a day, then the World Bank would check the box that you are no longer, quote unquote, living in poverty, which is absurd, quite frankly. I mean, think about it. Let's round that $1.90 off to $2 a day. So you make $2 a day For a month, that's the equivalent of roughly $60. I've been to Bangladesh, of course, worked there, and while prices are relatively low, there's no chance that you can live any quality of life on $60 a month. Literally, you're eking out a living to make sure that you can feed your family. And yet, the World Bank and others like the Asian Development Bank and the United Nations has an agenda where they want to show that their programs are working and that poverty is being alleviated. So, according to the World Bank, since 1971, even with all the ridiculous political behavior going on in the country, the number of people in poverty has shrunk from 90% in 1971 to 28% today. That is the type of statistics that you get by only looking at numbers on paper that are analyzed by people, most of them who have never been to Bangladesh. Because I can tell you, if you've been there, if you've worked there, you would see on your first day that there's no chance that that's the case. In fact, this middle class that's often talked about by the World Bank, the rise of the middle class in Bangladesh is actually somewhat artificial. Because the middle class in Bangladesh, for a large part, I don't want to overstate this, but for a large part, it comes from people who work for international donor organizations like the European Union or formerly United States Agency for International Development or for the German development organization GIZ or the Japanese organization JICA or some larger international NGOs. That's your middle class being funded by international organizations. Now, certainly, there are some positive stories that have developed with young people in Bangladesh that are starting new businesses, founding companies, being innovative. But a lot of the support for those programs that created that innovation and the new companies, et cetera, were provided by USAID, European Union, et cetera. You need to understand that the World Bank, who has espoused this huge decrease in poverty in Bangladesh, has a reason to do that. The World Bank doesn't give free money, they give loans. So the more money they lend a country, the more in debt the country becomes. And so both sides of the equation, the World Bank and the government of the country, needs to show impact from that money. Bangladesh is deeply in debt. They want to show that they're using that money to attack one of the biggest problems in society, and that's poverty. So they put forth statistics like this, that Bangladesh's per capita income has increased almost threefold between 2010 and 2020, from under $700 to $2,068, which is purported to be the highest GDP per capita in South Asia, and moves Bangladesh to the ranks of a middle income country. Both the government and the World Bank has said at the current growth, Bangladesh is projected to enter upper middle class income status by 2041 and to alleviate extreme poverty by 2031. Again, I can tell you, and I don't make statements like this lightly. I can tell you that the chances of that happening are about the same as my chances of being knighted by Prince Charles, or by King Charles, rather. Infinitesimal. And there are several reasons for that. First of all, most of these statistics are on paper. You can show any type of economic growth on paper. It's really what's happening on the ground that makes a difference. And there's a reason why the United States and the European Union and some of the wealthier countries in Asia and the Middle East have been involved in Bangladesh since 1971. That's because Bangladesh doesn't have the revenue on its own. It cannot generate even close to the amount of revenue to address not only economic growth, but healthcare, environment, infrastructure. The country has been supported by donors for so long that this artificial growth, this artificial progress has been created by the donor community. And now one of the biggest donors in Bangladesh, or quite frankly, any other country in the world, USAID, no longer exists. And so without that support, and with diminished support from the European Union and other partners, you're starting to see the fallacy behind these numbers. Bangladesh is on its 8th 5-year plan now. It's a plan that runs from 2020 to 2025. And governments typically do these 5 to 7-year plans as a way to show that they have a strategy to move forward. In theory, it's so that they can be transparent with their citizens and show what the government's going to do. But in most cases, and certainly in this case, this strategy was created so that they can show the donors what they wanted to do so they can get money to do it, because they don't have the money on their own. So organizations such as the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank, both of which lend money, don't give money, have gone all in and helped create much of this growth. But those organizations don't do the work on the ground. They just give the money. It was organizations like projects funded by USAID and the EU that were actually doing the work on the ground, working with the Bangladesh government and the private sector and the NGO community to be able to actually do the work. And those people are the ones who really know what's going on. And those people are the ones who understand the fallacy of this type of data. I look at this and I see the same type of thing that I've seen in many countries where I've worked. And that's everyone has an agenda. The government has an agenda. The local NGO, non-governmental organization community has an agenda. The business community has an agenda. The international community has an agenda. And when you see a country that from 1971 until today has sustained growth or developed a growth trajectory only because, not only, let me qualify that, primarily because of support from international donors, then you can see that there's a lot of icing, but not very much cake underneath. My mother used to say that you can put lipstick on a pig, but it's still a pig. And this is the kind of analogy that really applies in this case. The structural deficiencies in Bangladesh are still there. The corruption, the political machinations, the political control of a relative small number of people. And currently, again, they have a caretaker government. And the very nature of a caretaker government is that they are trying to keep the government working, but until there is real vision and real action, it's going to be very difficult to make progress. And so, even if the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank and the UN and the government of Bangladesh were right about the trajectory of economic growth in the country, their timeline is patently false. They're not right, by the way, but certainly their timeline's not right. Now, I've said all that to say this. Bangladesh is an amazing country filled with amazing people. And they're going to be okay. They've weathered so many storms. They've weathered every type of issue that you can have. From political nonsense to war to famine to adverse climate, natural disasters, you name it, it's happened in this country. And yet the people are still working. They're still fighting for something better. These youth that took to the streets, that finally deposed Sheikh Hasina, came to a breaking point where they could no longer see the kind of future that they hoped for. These were young people who were educated. They were in universities. They wanted to be doctors and lawyers and engineers and entrepreneurs. They had ideas and dreams and hopes for a better future. And they saw all of that evaporating, and so they took to the streets. And a number of them gave their lives by taking to the streets to dislodge a regime that they believed was not moving their country in the right direction. The hope of a country like this is always in its people. And the people of Bangladesh, buoyed by great leaders such as Salim Ahmad that I talked about in my last episode, and Saiful Islam, the head of the Chamber of Commerce, and others, are going to be those who transform this country. But to do so, they're going to have to put the system in place that will alleviate corruption, that will provide good governance, that will ensure rule of law, and that will create real economic growth, not artificially manufactured economic growth by borrowing money or by getting support from international aid organizations, but real economic growth that is planned by Bangladeshis, delivered by Bangladeshis, and that favorably impacts the Bangladesh people. That's what it's going to take. Even these great leaders won't be able to deliver what they want to deliver unless a system like that gets put in place. My fear now is that one of the biggest proponents of such a system and one of the biggest supporters of such a system, the United States, is no longer active through USAID to be able to provide the level of funding and support to move that forward. Certainly, we're still involved. We've got great embassy staff working there, and our efforts are supported by countries around the world. But again, outside support can help build the systems, but ultimately a country has to stand on its own. And so the cautionary tale is this: we need to stop kidding ourselves. These international organizations need to stop selling a bill of goods to the people in a country and to the rest of the world that economic growth is happening where it's not happening. And poverty alleviation is happening where it's not happening. These feel-good arguments need to go away. And everybody needs a dose of reality. And accountability systems need to be put in place to be able to protect the people of Bangladesh and other countries in the same situation from those who would seek to exploit them. Good intentions don't go very far. Actions need to be there. And hopefully, the United States and its friends around the world can continue to be part of the action that at some point in time will put Bangladesh on the real road to economic growth and good governance, not the one that's artificially created by international organizations that have an agenda. I'll end there. I know it wasn't a very feel-good episode today, but I do, as I said, love the Bangladesh people, and I know the country will make steps forward. But the reality of the situation is none of this is easy. And the work that I did and our teams did in Bangladesh and other countries, there wasn't one day that it was easy. But there also wasn't one day that we wanted to walk away from doing it. It became our passion. And in doing so, we made an impact on this country and the others in which we worked. Thanks for joining me today. We're going to jump into a new country in Asia during our next episode. So join me next Monday at 8 a.m. for some stops along the way, and we will jump into a new discussion of a new country, and I think that you're going to enjoy it. Until then, have a great week and happy holidays.